What happens when a daytime television host pushes too far and a Hollywood legend pushes back even harder? What you're about to witness is the most explosive live television moment in recent memory, a confrontation so intense it ended with one of daytime TV's biggest personalities walking off her own show and never coming back. This is the story of how Joy Behar's career at The View came to a shocking end during what was supposed to be a routine celebrity interview. If you think you've seen heated exchanges on daytime television before, you haven't seen anything like this. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment telling us what you think really happened behind the scenes, because this story has layers that will blow your mind. The studio audience at The View was buzzing with anticipation as the show returned from commercial break. Joy Behar, sitting in her usual spot at the Hot Topics table, shuffled her notes one final time before looking directly into camera 2. She had that familiar glint in her eye, the one her longtime viewers knew meant she was about to stir the pot. "Welcome back to The View," Joy announced with her trademark New York accent cutting through the studio air. "We're here with Academy Award winner Kevin Spacey, who's joining us to discuss his upcoming independent film project. Kevin, thank you for being here." Kevin Spacey, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit, sat across from the panel with his hands folded calmly in his lap. His expression was polite but guarded, the kind of carefully controlled demeanor that had served him well throughout his decades in Hollywood. "Thank you for having me, Joy," Kevin replied, his voice smooth and measured. "It's always interesting to be on live television." The word interesting seemed to hang in the air for a moment longer than necessary. Joy leaned forward slightly, her pen tapping against her notepad in a rhythmic pattern that regular viewers would recognize as her tell when she was about to go off script. "You know, Kevin, I have to ask," Joy began, her voice taking on that particular tone she used when she was about to make things uncomfortable. "There's been a lot of talk about accountability in Hollywood lately. How do you personally define redemption?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Kevin's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his media-trained smile remained firmly in place. "Well, Joy, I think redemption is about the work we do moving forward," Kevin answered carefully. "It's about contributing positively to the artistic community and focusing on the craft that brought us all together in the first place. But is it really that simple?" Joy pressed, her voice growing sharper. "Can someone just decide they've moved forward and expect everyone else to move with them?" The studio audience had grown noticeably quieter. Even the other co-hosts seemed to sense that Joy was venturing into territory that hadn't been discussed during the pre-interview production meeting. Kevin uncrossed his legs and leaned back in his chair, his composure still intact but his eyes now focused entirely on Joy. "I think, Joy, that we live in a society where people are allowed to rebuild their lives. That's what I'm doing, focusing on my work and the projects that matter to me." "Right. But what about the people who can't just rebuild?" Joy shot back, her voice rising slightly. "What about the people whose lives were affected by actions that some people in this industry have taken? Don't they deserve more than just someone saying they're focusing on their craft?" The tension in the studio was becoming palpable. Camera operators exchanged glances, and the show's producer could be seen frantically gesturing from the control booth, though Joy seemed oblivious to the signals. Kevin's demeanor shifted almost imperceptibly. The polite smile faded, replaced by something cooler, more calculating. "Joy, I came here today to talk about my new film, which deals with themes of human resilience and artistic expression. I'm not sure what specific situations you're referring to, but I think it's important that we don't make assumptions about people's experiences or motivations." "Oh, I'm not making assumptions," Joy replied, her voice now carrying the full force of her confrontational style. "I'm asking direct questions about accountability, something that seems to be in short supply these days, especially among people who think their talent gives them a free pass." The words hit their mark. Kevin's hands, which had been resting calmly in his lap, now gripped the arms of his chair. His voice, when he spoke, carried a new edge that hadn't been there moments before. "Joy, I need to stop you right there," Kevin said, his tone still controlled but with an unmistakable firmness. "You're making some very serious implications on live television, and I think you need to be very careful about the territory you're walking into." But Joy was in full attack mode now, the kind of confrontational stance that had made her a polarizing figure in daytime television. "I'm being careful, Kevin. I'm being careful to ask the questions that need to be asked. The questions that maybe other people have been too intimidated to ask." "Round. Intimidated?" Kevin repeated, his eyebrows raising slightly. "That's an interesting choice of words, Joy. Are you suggesting that other interviewers have been intimidated by me?" "I'm suggesting that maybe it's time someone asked the hard questions without worrying about ruffling feathers," Joy fired back. "Maybe it's time someone said what everyone else is thinking." Kevin was quiet for a long moment, and the silence stretched across the studio like a taut wire. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. "And what exactly is it that you think everyone is thinking, Joy?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Joy's co-hosts were now openly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and exchanging worried glances. The audience seemed to sense that they were witnessing something that was spiraling far beyond a typical daytime television interview. Joy, however, seemed energized by the confrontation. "I think everyone is wondering how someone can just show up and expect to be treated like nothing ever happened. I think people are wondering about accountability, about consequences, about whether talent really does give someone a free pass to just move on." Kevin's response, when it came, was delivered with the precision of a seasoned actor who knew exactly how to make every word count. "Joy, let me ask you something," Kevin said, his voice now carrying a subtle but unmistakable threat. "Do you really want to continue down this path on live television? Because once we go there, we can't go back, and I'm not sure you're prepared for where this conversation might lead." The threat in Kevin's voice was unmistakable, but Joy Behar had built her career on not backing down from confrontation. If anything, his warning seemed to fuel her determination to push even harder. "Are you threatening me, Kevin?" Joy asked, her voice cutting through the studio tension like a blade. "Because if you are, I think our viewers deserve to know exactly what kind of person they're dealing with." Kevin's laugh was soft but completely devoid of humor. "Threatening you? Joy, I'm trying to save you from yourself. You're walking into a conversation that you're not equipped to handle, making accusations on live television without any regard for the consequences. The only consequences I'm worried about are the ones that happen when people don't speak the truth." Joy shot back, leaning forward in her chair. "And the truth is that some people think they can just rehabilitate their image with a few interviews and expect everyone to forget what happened." "What exactly do you think happened, Joy?" Kevin asked, his voice dropping to an almost conversational tone that somehow made his words more menacing. "Because I'm very curious to hear what version of events you think you know." Joy's co-hosts were now openly trying to intervene. Whoopi could be seen making subtle hand gestures, trying to signal Joy to pull back. But Joy was completely focused on Kevin, as if the rest of the studio had disappeared. "I think what happened is that powerful people got away with things they shouldn't have gotten away with," Joy said, her voice rising with each word. "And I think some of those people are now trying to pretend it never happened." Kevin was silent for a long moment, studying Joy with the intensity of someone calculating his next move. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of quiet authority that had made him one of Hollywood's most compelling villains. "Joy, you're making a very serious mistake right now," Kevin said slowly. "You're confusing having a television show with having actual power. You're confusing being loud with being right. And you're about to learn the difference." "Is that another threat?" Joy demanded, her voice now loud enough that it echoed slightly in the studio. "Because I've been threatened by better people than you? And I'm still here." "No, Joy, it's not a threat," Kevin replied, his composure never wavering. "It's a promise. You want to play this game? Let's play. But let's make sure we're both clear on the rules." The studio had fallen completely silent, except for the low hum of the cameras. Even the crew members had stopped moving, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. "What rules?" Joy asked. Though, for the first time since the conversation began, there was a slight tremor in her voice. Kevin smiled, but it was the kind of smile that belonged in a thriller movie. "The rules are simple, Joy. You want to talk about accountability? Let's talk about your accountability. You want to discuss people's past actions? Let's discuss yours." "My past actions?" Joy laughed, but the laugh sounded forced. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that you've built your entire career on attacking people who can't fight back," Kevin said, his voice gaining momentum. "I'm talking about the countless guests who've sat in that chair while you ambushed them with questions they weren't prepared for, accusations they couldn't defend against on live television." Joy's face was beginning to flush red. "That's called journalism, Kevin. That's called asking the tough questions." "No, Joy. That's called being a bully with a microphone," Kevin replied, his voice now carrying the full force of his theatrical training. "And the difference between us is that I'm not going to sit here and let you do it to me." "You can't intimidate me," Joy said, but her voice was noticeably less steady than it had been moments before. "I'm not trying to intimidate you," Kevin said calmly. "I'm simply pointing out that if you want to have a conversation about people's behavior, we should have an honest conversation. And honestly, Joy, your behavior over the years has been far more destructive than anything I've ever been accused of." The accusation hit Joy like a physical blow. Her mouth opened and closed several times before she found her voice again. "How dare you?" she managed to say. "How dare you sit there and try to turn this around on me?" "I'm not turning anything around," Kevin replied smoothly. "I'm simply responding to your questions with questions of my own. You asked about accountability. I'm asking about yours. You asked about consequences. I'm asking about the consequences of your actions over the years." Joy was now gripping the edge of the table so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. "My actions? I've spent my career speaking truth to power." "Your actions," Kevin repeated, his voice growing more forceful. "The guests you've destroyed with your ambush tactics. The careers you've damaged with your reckless accusations. The people who've left this studio feeling humiliated and violated because you thought it made for good television." "That's not," Joy started to say, but Kevin cut her off. "The young actors who came on this show to promote their first films and left feeling like they'd been attacked," Kevin continued, his voice building like a prosecutor making his closing argument. "The politicians who agreed to interviews and found themselves facing a hostile interrogation instead. The authors, the musicians, the directors who trusted this show and found themselves facing your particular brand of character assassination." Joy was now visibly shaken, her usual confidence completely eroded. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about," Kevin said, leaning forward in his chair. "I know, because I've spoken to some of those people." "Joy, I know because the entertainment industry is smaller than you think, and people talk. They talk about the fear they feel when they're booked on this show. They talk about the anxiety they experience knowing they might face one of your ambush interviews. That's..." Joy began, but her voice cracked slightly. "That's what, Joy?" Kevin asked, pressing his advantage. "That's not true?" "Because I can give you names if you'd like. I can tell you about the young actress who had a panic attack in your green room after you spent 10 minutes attacking her personal life instead of discussing her work. I can tell you about the musician who still won't do television interviews because of how you treated him on this show." Joy's face had gone from red to pale, and her hands were now trembling slightly. The other co-hosts were looking between Joy and the control booth, clearly desperate for someone to intervene. "You're lying," Joy said. But her voice was barely above a whisper. "Am I?" Kevin asked, his voice now deadly quiet. "Because here's the thing about accountability, Joy. It works both ways. You want to hold other people accountable for their actions? then you need to be held accountable for yours. And your actions, over the years, have been consistently cruel, consistently destructive, and consistently protected by the shield of this television show. Joy stood up suddenly, her chair rolling backward with the force of her movement. Her face was now a mixture of rage and something that looked dangerously close to panic. "I don't have to listen to this," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "No, you don't," Kevin agreed, his voice returning to its earlier calm tone. "You can walk away. You can do what you've always done when someone finally stands up to you. You can run." The word run hung in the studio air like a gauntlet thrown down. Joy stood frozen behind the table, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she stared at Kevin with a mixture of fury and disbelief. "Run?" Joy repeated, her voice cracking with emotion. "I've never run from anything in my life." "Haven't you?" Kevin asked, settling back in his chair with the confidence of someone who knew he had gained the upper hand. "What about the interview with the Broadway producer 3 years ago? The one where you made personal accusations that you couldn't back up, and when he started to defend himself, you suddenly had to go to commercial?" Joy's face went completely white. "That's not what happened." "Or the time with the documentary filmmaker," Kevin continued relentlessly. "The one who was trying to discuss her work about women's rights, but you spent the entire interview attacking her personal relationships instead? And when she started to push back, you suddenly developed technical difficulties?" "Stop it," Joy whispered, but Kevin was nowhere near finished. "The environmental activist who came here to discuss climate change but left after you spent 15 minutes grilling him about his divorce," Kevin went on, his voice gaining momentum like a freight train. "The cookbook author who broke down crying on live television because you decided her weight was more interesting than her recipes. The teenager who won a science competition and came here excited to share her work, only to have you spend the interview questioning whether her parents had done the work for her." With each example, Joy seemed to shrink further into herself. Her co-hosts were now openly staring, as if seeing her for the first time. "Those were legitimate questions," Joy managed to say, but her voice sounded hollow even to herself. "Were they?" Kevin asked, raising an eyebrow. "Or were they the questions of someone who confused cruelty with journalism? Someone who thought that making people uncomfortable was the same thing as holding them accountable?" Joy's hands were shaking now as she gripped the back of her chair. "You don't understand what it's like to do this job." "I understand exactly what it's like to do your job," Kevin replied coldly. "I understand what it's like to perform every day, to maintain a persona, to give people what they expect from you. The difference is that my performances don't destroy real people's lives." "I've helped people," Joy protested weakly. "I've given voice to important issues." "You've given voice to your own ego," Kevin shot back. "You've used this platform to feed your own need to be the center of attention, to be the one asking the hard questions, regardless of who got hurt in the process." Joy was now openly crying, tears streaming down her face as she struggled to maintain some semblance of composure. "You can't say these things to me." "Why not?" Kevin asked, his voice softening slightly but losing none of its intensity. "Because you're not used to being on the receiving end? Because you're used to being the one who gets to attack while hiding behind the protection of being the host?" "I'm done," Joy said suddenly, her voice breaking completely. "I'm done with this." "Are you?" Kevin asked. "Because this is what you do to other people, Joy. This is what it feels like to be sitting in my chair while you tear them apart for your own entertainment. This is what it feels like to be ambushed, to be attacked, to be made to feel small and helpless while you perform for your audience." Joy pulled off her microphone with shaking hands, the small device clattering as it hit the table. "I said I'm done." "And that's your choice," Kevin said calmly. "Just like it was their choice to leave, to walk away, to refuse to come back on television because of how you treated them. The only difference is that they didn't have anywhere to run to. They just had to live with what you did to them." "Shut up," Joy whispered. But there was no force behind the words. "The young mother who came here to talk about her book on parenting and left feeling like a failure because you questioned every choice she'd made. Kevin continued inexorably. The war veteran who wanted to discuss PTSD awareness, but ended up being grilled about his personal struggles instead of his advocacy work. The small business owner who came here proud of her success and left feeling like a fraud because you spent the interview suggesting she didn't deserve her achievements. Joy was backing away from the table now, her face streaked with tears and mascara. Stop it. Just stop it. The high school teacher who won a national award and came here excited to talk about education, only to have you spend the entire time questioning her methods and making her defend herself to a national audience. Kevin went on, his voice never wavering. The cancer survivor who wanted to share her story of hope, but left feeling like her experience had been trivialized because you were more interested in the dramatic details than the message of resilience. I helped those people, Joy sobbed. I gave them a platform. You used those people. Kevin corrected firmly. You used their stories, their vulnerabilities, their trust, to create television moments that would get people talking. And when they tried to defend themselves, when they tried to maintain some dignity, you cut them down even further. This is no. One we saw with now courting to in Decid, and they courting to in 25 too, the Screamtown and a fiver. Joy was now at the edge of the stage area, her whole body shaking with the force of her sobs. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing the complete breakdown of someone they had watched for years. This isn't who I am, Joy whispered. Isn't it? Kevin asked, his voice now almost gentle in its cruelty. Because this is who you've been every day for years, Joy. This is the person who sits in that chair and decides that other people's pain is acceptable collateral damage for good television ratings. Joy turned toward the exit, but Kevin's voice stopped her one last time. The difference between us, Joy, he said quietly, is that I'm giving you a choice. I'm letting you walk away. I'm not following you backstage to continue this conversation. I'm not bringing up things from your personal life to hurt you more. I'm not trying to destroy you completely. I'm showing you more mercy than you've ever shown anyone who sat in this chair. Joy stood frozen in the doorway for a moment, her back to the cameras. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. I quit, she said, the words carrying across the silent studio. I quit The View. I'm done. And with that, Joy Behar walked out of the studio, leaving behind a career that had spanned decades, and a legacy that would forever be defined by this single, devastating conversation. Kevin remained in his chair, looking directly into the camera with the calm composure of someone who had just delivered the performance of his lifetime. I think, he said quietly to the stunned audience, we should probably go to commercial. The cameras kept rolling as producers scrambled to figure out what to do next, capturing every moment of the most explosive confrontation in daytime television history. Joy Behar had finally met someone who refused to be intimidated, someone who turned her own tactics against her, and someone who showed her exactly what it felt like to be on the other side of her relentless questioning. And that was the end of Joy Behar's time at The View. So, what do you think really pushed Kevin Spacey to that breaking point? Was this a calculated move? Or did Joy finally push the wrong person too far? Subscribe to the channel and drop a comment with your theory about what was really going through Kevin's mind during that explosive confrontation. Because this story has more layers than what we saw on screen.